of people and pushed millions to the brink of starvation. The conflict between Houthi rebels and the Saudi-led coalition escalated back in 2015, and there have been multiple warnings from the UN of a humanitarian catastrophe. We've also been watching just unverified reports in the last hour or so of fresh airstrikes in a market in Sadr province, which has killed 10 civilians. Well, let's speak now to Achim Steiner from the United Nations Development Programme. He's just been visiting a few of the cities in Yemen. He's now in Oman. And thank you, Achim Steiner, for joining us live here on the programme. What is your latest assessment from what you've seen on the ground?
Well, everything that I saw during the 5 days that I traveled across Yemen confirms what the UN calls now the largest humanitarian disaster in the world. 80% of Yemen's population is in need of humanitarian needs. Over 10 million people are on the brink of famine. Millions of children are not going to school. Health centers and basic supplies and services have been disrupted. The economy is in a mode of implosion. And our recent assessment shows that the 4 years of conflict have essentially thrown back Yemen by 20 years in terms of all the basic development indicators. So the attempts to broker a peace agreement and to begin to bring that country back from the brink have taken even greater urgency on, because the suffering is almost unimaginable.
That is a staggering assessment when you say it has pushed the country back 20 years. Now, the attempts to demilitarize the port city of Hodeidah, which is so vital, that is stuck. How problematic is that, and how do you actually unlock that?
Well, in two respects, it's fundamental. First of all, it is the gateway to Yemen in terms of importation of goods. 80% of imports passed through Hodeidah in the past, and 75% of the humanitarian supplies that are needed so urgently in the country today have to pass through the port of Hodeidah. But also the Stockholm Peace Agreement that the Secretary General helped to broker, and my colleague, the Special Envoy of the Secretary General, Martin Griffiths, is now engaged in shuttle diplomacy to actually implement, has become a gateway to peace. Because if he cannot succeed in Hodeidah to lay the foundations for deconflicting and ultimately also for reconstruction of the port, then much of the hope that is associated with the Stockholm Peace Agreement may fade. So also our engagement as the United Nations Development Programme, as part of the UN's overall effort, is now focused on rehabilitating that port as quickly as possible. But for that, we need demilitarization. We need the conditions under which this can happen. And as your report just showed, Yemen is very much still a country affected by war and conflict, and puts many of our own staff at great risk every day.
And the US Congress tried to intervene last week. That was vetoed by Donald Trump. I mean, you gave that very, very damning assessment right at the top of this interview about what it is like there on the ground. How frustrating is it for you as a UN official? Because it is not the first time. We have done interviews like this so many times over the months, over the years, and there doesn't seem to be the follow-through, the action from the international community. How frustrating is that?
Well, in many respects, the frustration arises primarily from the fact that this war could be ended tomorrow. But as often in conflicts, that is an easy thing to say. The United Nations is engaged at many different levels in trying to assist Yemen at the political level with the peace agreement. Our colleagues in the humanitarian agencies, from the World Food Programme that is currently providing food to 11 million Yemenis, to UNICEF, to our partnership with the World Bank, to create programs for livelihoods in which we are cooperating with UNDP in 300 districts. These are all measures that we are taking alongside also a very specific intervention now in the port of Hodeidah. This is now the litmus test for moving forward. And I would say that despite all the setbacks, there are very real prospects, first of all, of trying to move the peace agreement forward. And secondly, the humanitarian response is extraordinary. It is the generosity of the international community that has helped Yemenis to stay alive, and we should not underestimate that. But I also want to take this opportunity to say we cannot turn away from Yemen at this moment, and that is sometimes the concern that we have when we look at the pledges that will enable this work to continue right now.
Just very briefly, the suffering is almost unimaginable. What is the window of opportunity here to actually fix this, get some sort of settlement, make progress? Otherwise, all those figures that you were going through, mortality, starvation, where does that go and how quickly?
Well, essentially the situation is escalating, and just to remind your listeners also, Yemen was the largest cholera crisis just a year and a half ago. That, with international support, was brought down from over 1 million cases to 300,000 cases. We are now back at recording 500,000, 500,000, i.e. interventions, medical supplies are urgently necessary. Otherwise, this crisis will escalate in numerical terms and may have also ramifications well beyond the borders of Yemen.
Achim Steiner, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us so quickly after leaving Yemen. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme.